Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the podcast that follows the money behind our beautiful game. I am Kevin Day, and over there is the Tyson Fury of the forensic accounting world, the top dog, the heavyweight champion, Kieran Maguire. How are you, Kieran?
I'm very well, thank you, Kevin.
Good. You're all chipper today? You look quite chipper.
Yeah, I'm always in a good mood, me, as a rule.
I was getting slightly worried when you looked really chipper. Now, coming up, Everton and their shirt sponsors, the price of being a mascot, the cost of a wrong T-shirt, and our last pod on Monday was a bit of a sombre one because we were talking about Man City in depth. But we have better news for another club in the Northwest in the guise of AFC Bury AFC. So we'll be talking about that. Hopefully the start of a journey for them that started around about the same time as we did. So fingers crossed for them. Now Everton, we've talked a lot about Everton recently in terms of not yet existent stadiums, naming rights, all sorts. Now they've ditched their quite long-term shirt sponsors. Is there anything behind that? Is there any sinister reasons? Is it timing, coincidence?
It seems a little bit strange because they have an agreement, a front of shirt sponsorship agreement with a company called SportPesa. Now, SportPesa have offices around the world, including Liverpool itself, but they have the big say in Africa, especially Kenya.
Okay. Are they a Kenyan-based company? Or?
Well, yeah, it's difficult to work out, but they've certainly got significant representation there.
Right. So they're one of those companies. I'm never entirely sure whether shirt sponsorship is effective because it's like we've got ManBetX on the front of our shirts. I don't know anybody who's ever gone to ManBetX website, and it's the same with SportPesa. You see it on the front of the shirt without ever realising what it actually is. So it's an African-based gambling company.
That's right. And if you take a look at what's been happening in Kenya recently, I think it actually has been very successful because the Kenyan government is now very, very concerned with the degree of gambling addiction that is taking place in its country. With the arrival of smartphones a decade ago, it completely revolutionised the betting environment. And the government has made it now very difficult for people to use organisations such as SportPesa back in its home country.
Right. I was there for comic relief a decade ago to see some of the terrible squalor in the Kibera, the largest shantytown slum in the world, and even then gambling was a reason. People who haven't got anything are willing to risk it to try and get a tiny something. So men gambling was a problem then. So with the advent of smartphones, it's got worse. But interesting that a government has actually seen fit to take action to do something about it.
That's right. There was an announcement from Everton that, with almost immediate effect, that SportPesa were no longer going to be their front of shirt deal. Now, the deal originally signed was due to expire in 2022.
Okay.
So that means it had 2 seasons to go.
Right.
So it's unusual to break a contract mid-deal. If you take a look at what happened with Chelsea when they switched from Adidas to Nike, that was mid-deal, and it meant that Chelsea ended up paying Adidas around about £65 million in compensation.
Right.
There's no evidence of such an arrangement between Everton and SportPesa. Now, it could be that we'll find out in due course that some arrangement has been made.
But it would be unusual, though, would it not, for a company like SportPesa to not have that in the contract?
That's right. So there have been whispers.
I can see by your face. I can literally see your antenna twitching. The hairs on the back of your. I can't even see the back of your head, but I can see the hairs on the back of your head. You've got the bit between your teeth, haven't you?
Well, yeah. If it's been successful for SportPesa until this ban from Kenya, the whispers are that SportPesa, as a result of what's been happening back in Africa, they've lost a significant amount of income,
right,
which has meant that they've found it difficult to make the instalments to Everton. So the deal is supposed to be, according to stories in the press, it's supposed to be worth around about £9.5 to £10 million a year. So clearly that's a significant cheque to have to write out. At Everton's last general meeting, their chief executive said that having a relationship with a sports gambling company isn't ideal. Isn't it? So it could be that what we have is that Everton are seeing this as a potential exit route where they can take the moral high ground without being penalised, because they've actually spoken to SportPesa and they're aware of these potential cash flow problems that the company has had. So therefore, both parties have gone their separate ways.
So have Everton got another sponsor lined up, do we know, to take over straight away, or would that be till the end of the season?
I think until the end of the season, SportPesa will still be on the shirts. I think it was noticeable at Everton's last home game that they had Everton in the Community as their shirt sponsor, and the Everton in the Community scheme is absolutely superb. It's one of the very best in the country.
I'd rather we didn't talk about Everton's last home game.
Oh, right.
Yeah, but carry on. Well, I know their community stuff is very good.
So now under practically the Premier League rule that you are allowed one home match a season where you can effectively donate your front of shirt sponsorship to an alternative party, and I think most clubs take this up with a good cause. Was the timing coincidental? Conspiracy theorists will say yes. There's no evidence to say that Everton won't carry on using SportPesa, because in theory they must have been paid up to the end of 2020. Is there somebody new on the horizon? Well, now we reach the role of Alisher Osmanov, who he's the guy whose company USM Holdings, they sponsor the training ground, and they're the people who have paid for the naming rights option to the new stadium, which won't exist for another 4 years at least. So I think Everton fans are hoping that would be the choice, because they are aware that Usmanov, he owns Mail.ru and some other companies. So we're talking some fairly big institutions. He's certainly one of the richest people in this country at present. They would be delighted if he was to go and offer to pay huge sums for front of shirt sponsorship. However, we are now operating in the post Manchester City ruling era, and I think that the Premier League would feel obliged to take a look at the numbers involved to see whether or not they're at market rates. So can this company offer £100 million a season? Yes, it can for front of shirt sponsorship. But what the Premier League would then do is they would say, what is the market value of that transaction? And that is the only amount that would be allowed for financial fair play rules. It's all getting very complicated, as these things always tend to do so. Why are the gambling companies able to offer these sums? It's simply because gambling's the biggest game in town. When are people gambling, and when are people who don't bet on horses gambling? It's when football matches are taking place. Now, you rightly said that is it ManBetX, our Palace's sponsor. No Palace fans will be using them, but I can assure you in other countries,
of course.
And that's the thing. We fall into this football bubble, is that you and I go to matches and we attend, and we say, well, none of my mates are doing it, but actually we're not the intended audience.
Okay.
And the brand loyalty back home, because all of a sudden, if you are based in Malta or Malaysia or wherever the country is going to be, it's our gambling company from our country, that's being represented in the Premier League, and that instantly gains appeal and brand loyalty back home.
That timer you just heard is the one I set. Whenever Kieran goes 2 minutes into a sentence, that timer goes off, and it also means that Ed's sausages are ready, which is lovely. Vegetarian sausages, so you'd love them.
Vegetarian sausages.
We'll talk a little bit more about the gambling aspect in just a moment, but there's two things that interest me. One from a marketing point of view, which I'm not interested at all, but if you were to ask me who was on the front of Everton's shirt, I wouldn't be able to tell you, but I do know they've got Angry Birds on their sleeve. So some part of their marketing is working better than others. But if Usmanov, so USB Holdings, is that...
USM Holdings.
USM Holdings, I beg your pardon.
Yeah.
So the club would essentially be USM branded everywhere. So the training ground is USM Finch Farm. The new ground, the stadium would be USM. The kit would be USM. Is there not a danger there if you're putting all your eggs into one basket, even if you've got a good relationship with that person, that's a big risk, because if he decides, or if he falls out with the owner, that's a big chunk of money that's being taken out, isn't it?
It is, but that's always a risk when you've got close relationships and you've got business partners working together. I think in another pod we're planning to take a look at Blackpool, where again there were two owners that fell out. If you take a look at West Ham, you've got David Sullivan and David Gold. You know, they have historic business relationships, as do Usmanov and Mashiri, the actual owner at Everton. If you're working in business, sometimes that's part of the deal. That's the way it goes. You've only got to look at what happened in Dallas when the Ewing family used to fall out, but it can go terribly wrong. Yeah,
that was fictional, though. Can we have fictional families on this pod?
Oh, I don't know. We can do whatever we want to, Kevin.
Well, I don't see. Suddenly you're throwing me into doubt now, because I've never doubted anything you've ever told me. But now you're using a fictional family as an illustration of what could happen at Everton. Now the gambling thing is interesting. We're planning a gambling special. We've been talking about this for quite some time. We're hoping to get somebody from Sporting Chance, and there's a scientist I know who specialises in the effect of gambling on families. You've often said that the reason there's so many gambling sponsors is because they're the only people who've got the money to stump up the Premier League what they want, Premier League clubs. So this is actually quite a departure then. If a club were to turn around and give as a reason for stopping a sponsorship deal with a gambling company their moral doubts about gambling as a whole, that would be an interesting, possibly pebble that might lead to an avalanche from other clubs, do you think?
I think so. If you take a look at comments made by Richard Masters, who is the new chief executive of the Premier League, he was quizzed on this particular issue, and he was sort of, as trying to be as non-committal as possible, because he's aware that his members, half of them, are being sponsored by gambling companies. What we are seeing is increasing comments from politicians along the lines of football and gambling shouldn't be working together. Now, is there an element of hypocrisy there, where we've got other sports such as horse racing, which effectively only exists as a result of the gambling industry? Why is one morally repugnant and the other one morally acceptable?
Well, it's a very interesting point. I was in the Betway box at West Ham in the FA Cup thing for research purposes, I have to say. But I was talking to a friend of mine, Mark Webster, a broadcaster, and he sees the other side of that, because he talks about the hypocrisy of people like me questioning whether gambling should be involved. He said, while it's legal, why not take advantage of the money that is available from these gambling companies? And when it's made illegal, then of course you stop. But at the moment, it's perfectly legal for people over the age of 18 to gamble. It's whether it's morally acceptable the way the gambling companies entice them in is another matter. But he does have a point. At the moment, while it's legal, football clubs don't need to feel that they have a moral responsibility, do they, or do they?
That's down to the club owners. What do they want? What do they want to be presenting to the outside world as what their club represents? Smoking is legal for people over 18.
Yeah, good point.
It's not that long ago where smoking was also acceptable and legal in cinemas and restaurants and pubs and so on. And I think one of the things I noticed when I travel to other countries is that if I walk into a restaurant and people are smoking, I think I've gone back. I think I've stepped back a generation. How this is going to progress, the gambling industry itself, I think, has spoken about having a voluntary ban in terms of shirt sponsorship. They've also agreed to know what they refer to as whistle-to-whistle advertising during football matches.
Okay.
But that means that they can still advertise before kick-off and after kick-off. And if you take a listen to some of the commercial radio stations, they are commenting on the match, and they are also bringing up the odds in play as well. Yeah. Now, why are they doing that? It's because the betting companies pay the best rates in town, and you can see why that relationship exists. I don't think it is fair to expect the industry to make a unilateral decision. I think a broader debate is required, and the government has to show some initiative and leadership here.
There was a time, just to end this debate, to prove that you can do without tainted money if you want. There's a time when cricket and Grand Prix, Formula One, said they wouldn't be able to survive without the sponsorship of tobacco companies. They sponsored cricket's 2 cup tournaments, most Grand Prix teams. But when, quite rightly, tobacco companies were stopped from sponsoring these tournaments, they found other sponsors. There's always other sponsors. And there probably will be a time, as we've discussed, when history will look back and say it was just as ludicrous to allow gambling companies to sponsor shirts as it was to allow tobacco and alcohol companies.
That's right, and if we take a look at the numbers involved, if Everton are getting £9.5 million a year from a gambling company, that's in the context of a business which is earning £170 million a year.
Right.
So we're talking 5 or 6% of total income. Somebody else is going to fill that vacuum. Now they might pay £6 million instead of £9. Everton going to miss £3 million a year? Well, nobody wants their income to go down, but it's certainly not going to devastate clubs in the Premier League. When we drop down into the Championship, I think it's more of an issue because the clubs there have much lower income rates to begin with. Admittedly, the sponsorship deals aren't as generous, but I think as a proportion of income, I think the Championship clubs will be more concerned.
Now, this is a subject we get asked about a lot, and it represents a lot of outlay for fans for what you'd imagine isn't a lot of money income-wise for the clubs. And this is mascots, match day mascots. Not long ago, my mate Chris, hello Chris, Chirpy, his nickname's Chirpy because he is chirpy. He wanted, as his 50th birthday treat, to be the mascot for a Palace game, which we approached the club and saw nothing wrong with it. The club seemed to think it was slightly sinister and decided that it wasn't going to happen, but not before telling us how much they would charge us if they did. The cost of being a mascot, I mean, it's a lot of money for a parent to spend, but it's not a lot of money for the club. The club can't be making that much money out of mascots. I know we've got 11 mascots now, and it's always funny when the mascot's taller than the Max Mayer, which happens quite a lot. You half expect Max Mayer to walk out holding Gary Cahill's hand sometimes, but what are the finances of it?
I think in total it's estimated that mascots will bring in around about £500,000 a year. I think that's split between the 20 clubs. So in football terms,
it's not a lot, is it?
It's not great.
No.
When you then break that down on a club-by-club basis, we're seeing a variety of approaches. We've got, for some clubs, they don't charge anything, and all 11 mascots are chosen from the supporters club. Now, that on the face of it looks great, but of course there's normally a fee to be a member of the supporters club.
Are Premier League clubs included in this?
Premier League clubs, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Manchester United, Manchester City, they both do things of that nature.
Right.
So I think that happens with quite a few clubs. What we then have is a sort of a halfway house, whereby a club might have 8 or 9 mascots who are paying, and you can be paying up to £750 for gold games. Sometimes the clubs will actually, as well as tiering the prices for tickets, they will tier the prices for the mascot. So if your team is playing against Liverpool, it's going to cost you more than if you're playing against Bournemouth or Watford.
Okay.
So it could be that you have to pay for 7 or 8 of those, and then 3 or 4 go into a draw, and then there's a final scenario where if you want to be a mascot, you have to pay. And now some clubs say that if you provide your own kit, they'll give you a discount. Normally, as part of the package, will be a kit given by the club for the occasion.
Okay, this next story, I think, is potentially one of the most sinister stories we've talked about, even though it only involves one person and one club. We talked earlier, a few weeks ago, about somebody at a club who was banned for tweeting about opposition opponents, about Man City's politics. And now we've got this West Ham fan who's been banned for wearing a fairly low-key T-shirt, which basically said GSB out, basically referring to the owners. He was ejected from the stadium and he's now had his ban rejected. So he's back, essentially. He's had his season ticket taken away. He's not allowed in the stadium. This, for me, is the thin end of a wedge, isn't it? This is something we should be worrying about, isn't it?
Yes. We are living in a country now where the word freedom is now seen as a bad word. We're seeing that freedom of movement is now deemed to be bad. Is freedom of speech, freedom of expression, also going to go the same way? What exactly happened here? And I was at the match concerned because this was West Ham versus Brighton. One of the West Ham fans who was a flag bearer. So at some grounds,
yes.
They'll be waving the giant flags around. It's all part of the pre-match entertainment, and it happens, when the team scores, which therefore happened quite a few occasions during that match. And what the guy had done is that he, underneath his jacket, he had this T-shirt which said GSB out, Gold, Sullivan, Brady. And that is one of the slogans, and there are badges which are being worn of a similar nature by fans who are unhappy with the behaviour of the West Ham owners. The West Ham made a decision when they saw him. They couldn't stop him from waving the flag. Was that they were going to ban him for the rest of the season because effectively by wearing that T-shirt he was inciting others to behave in an improper way, potential pitch invasions. I think they went down that particular route. Then the landlords, they ultimately, West Ham are the tenants at the London Stadium. The landlords initially backed up that decision and upheld the season ticket ban until the end of the season.
Right.
And there's always a further issue here, is that if you've lost your season ticket, are you guaranteed to get it back? At West Ham, like most of the clubs in the Premier League, have a long waiting list. So this can be used as a vehicle to get rid of people. They say, you can come back now, but you're at the back of the queue for next year's season ticket. However, on Wednesday, the decision was reversed again.
Oh, okay.
So this is good news for the guy involved, a guy called Cameron Robson. So he is now allowed to attend matches. So he was effectively given a 2-match ban by the club. I think that was on the basis of there had been so many people supporting him, and so little support for the club in terms of the decision that it had made, that they decided that from a public relations perspective, they needed to appear to be the good guys or be the less bad guys on this.
Or they had the good sense to realise that 30,000 blokes would be turning up in GSB out T-shirts for the next game, essentially. But it does raise two questions. I when I get my season ticket every year, I don't read the letter that comes with it. I'd make sure they spelt my name wrong and they spelt Palace right. But I don't. There is a letter on the terms and conditions. Now, does the season ticket only imply the right to watch the game? So are there rules in the season ticket regulations at your club Brighton and my club Palace? Will it specifically state we have the right to take the season ticket away if you don't comply with various regulations?
The season ticket belongs to the club.
Okay.
You are allowed to use the season ticket provided that you satisfy certain criteria in terms of the language you use. So therefore people have been ejected rightly for using racist language, anti-Semitic language, homophobic language and so on. And anything that the club ultimately decides is inappropriate. So if you're swearing at a steward and some people just take it too far.
Cool.
And I'm all for that because if the stewards, some of them go too far, we know that, but the vast majority are actually pretty good at calming down fairly volatile scenarios. They're not well paid. And the same goes for the staff in catering. So I have no issue at all because going to a football match doesn't give you a license to be a complete dickhead.
It would be nice if we could apply some criteria as well when we got the season ticket. So I will use this if you provide me with entertaining, attacking football. But you can't have everything, can you?
No.
But so then, could my theory about this? Could a club or a steward or an official or whoever take exception to a political T-shirt, for example? If somebody was to turn up with a United Ireland T-shirt or a T-shirt of a political party and the club decided they weren't a fan of this, Steve Parish is a big fan of Brexit. If a Palace fan were to turn up with a bollocks to Brexit T-shirt on, would they be within their rights, the club, to prevent them entering?
Yes, if in the view of the club that the behaviour had a potential to cause any form of trouble,
right?
Then they're imperfectly entitled to do what they want. And I think there have been examples in the past where there have been protests. Sometimes the clubs will identify the people who are associated with the head of the protest, and they would just unilaterally decide that person is no longer welcome at the club.
Okay, well, let's finish with some good news. We started way back, our very first pod, with the sad story of the demise of Bury Football Club and the evil machinations of Steve Dale, the owner. Now, the good news is that Bury AFC have been given permission to take part in the North West Counties League from next season, which I believe is the 10th level,
10th or 11th
of English football. It's very good news. A, where are they going to play? Where does Steve Dale fit in all this? And B, what are the finances like at that level of football?
They say that they have found somewhere. Right. I've been looking at FA regulations for Grade H of stadia.
Okay.
Which effectively means...
How far down does it go?
To H.
Oh. You're the only person who's ever read that far down, haven't you? Yeah.
That effectively means that all that you need is a box for both sets of home and away boxes for managers, and a rail, which has to be filled in, and that's got to give at least a metre perimeter around a metre gap around the pitch.
I believe a man and a dog is also compulsory at that level, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and somebody who looks like they might be a scout for a bigger club, that's always compulsory at that level, isn't it?
Yes, but you also have to have some form of floodlights.
Oh, do you? At that level? Oh, okay.
And the floodlights have to be of a certain wattage and so on, because remember you will potentially be joining the FA Cup.
Of course, of course.
At the preliminary rounds. So AFC Bury and I think a club from the Isle of Man, somewhat bizarrely, have been admitted to the North West Counties. I believe there were 10 or 11 applicants. So these two clubs have been deemed to be successful. I think what they will now be doing is desperately trying to confirm that they've got a pitch. I'd imagine they'll be doing some fundraising and trying to set themselves up to get the support of Bury fans.
Yeah.
I think it's also fair to say that this has split the Bury support to a degree, because some people say by taking such an action, you're effectively abandoning Gig Lane and you're giving Steve Dale the opportunity to sell it and to make some form of financial benefits from that. So the Bury fans are not 100% in favour of this. It has been a classic case, I think we've said this before, of divide and rule, but they had to apply for the start of next season. Now, it could be that if another plan comes in and somebody rescues the club in the meantime, they could withdraw their application to the North West Counties, and presumably they'd pay a small fine, and the club would then start again at Gig Lane in some other form.
Or you could have two clubs in Bury, that would be the most remarkable outcome if in 10 years' time you've got two Bury clubs playing in League One or League Two. I presume then if Bury AFC do carry on and become a Phoenix club in the North West Counties League, this is actually good news for the other clubs in the North West Counties, because you'd imagine that Bury AFC would be bringing 200-300 people with them and doubling the size of the gate for most clubs, you'd guess, wouldn't you?
Oh, very much so. If you take a look at FC United of Manchester, who have again effectively started out as a park club, they were bringing up to 1,000 fans, and it was overwhelming. And also, in my experience, I've seen FC United play in FA Cup games. It's a fantastic experience. For those of us who do have this nostalgic view of football, it was very old school without the bad bits that we remember from the 70s and the 80s. And if you talk to people that go to watch FC, and they've had their problems recently, there's been a massive fallout. I think those initial seasons when they effectively rocketed through the lower leagues was some of the most exciting that they can remember for a long time.
I think AFC Wimbledon fans would say the same thing as well. That the first 2 or 3 years, I think, was just an adrenaline-fueled ride for All of them, amazingly. Whatever happens to Bury or Berries, we wish them all the very best. I'm sure every right-thinking football fan would do the same thing. The Price of Football is a Dap Dip production. Don't forget, if you have questions for us for our Monday specials, the address is questions@priceoffootball.com, and we'll see you soon.
The Price of Football.
Cheerio, gang.
The Price of Football.